The session is titled Asia Pacific, Perspectives from the United States and Russia. And for this session, we have Dr. Subha Chandran, the Director of Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, who would be chairing the session. And the speakers for this session are Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, Professor at Center for American Studies, GNU, who will be giving the perspectives from the US. And the next speaker is Ambassador M.K. Bhadrakumar, former ambassador to USSR, who will be presenting the perspectives from Russia. Thank you. Handing over to Dr. Subha Chandran.
Thank you, Aditi. Let me thank Niaz for inviting me to be here for this session. Given the lack of time, I requested both the speakers whether they can keep their initial presentations to 15 minutes. Given the galaxy of speakers, I would want quality discussion, and we are capable of a much better discussion. And then I think it would be a pity if we cut short the discussion for want of time. So I've requested, and then they have kindly agreed to keep their main presentation to 15 minutes. So on the 12th minute, sir, I'll just let you know that we have 3 more minutes. And I went through the concept note that have been circulated for this session, which is extremely well drafted. I would just, for the sake of the discussions, I would underline 5 questions that they have asked us to discuss in this session. I'll have 1 or 2 extra questions also to that. The first question that they have asked in the concept note is how major powers reacting to the emerging and changing geopolitics in the region, Asia Pacific. My additional question would be, are they only reacting to the emerging situation, or are they causing the situation to emerge? US and Russia, maybe you may like to address that question as well. The second question is, how will the US respond if there is a confrontation between China and the littoral states? The way that the concept note says is the military response, but we have seen what's happening in ADIZ, how they have already responded. Will the response be only military, or will it be political as well? What kind of a political responses they would have bringing the regions in? Is Indo-Pacific a part of that response? The third question is very interesting that they have asked, will the US and Russia oppose China's move? The way that Russia is moving, or China-Russia relations is shaping, will Russia move with US, or what would be Russia's Asia-Pacific strategy? That would be an interesting question to answer. The fourth question that they have identified in the concept note is, to what extent Russia's attempt to re-engage the region would impact the notion of Indo-Pacific? Would Russia be more interested in Indo-Pacific, or would it look at a larger one from West Asia to East Asia? Maybe Afghanistan, West Asia, multiple issues, even North Korea for that matter. I'm sure Ambassador would like to take that question. How would Russia respond? The final interesting question I found in the concept note is, will US or Russia oppose China's move to establish Third Island chain strategy and take military help from India? Would they ask only for military help, or would they ask for something more, or would they engage the regions in a larger one? What is happening in IORA and IONS in the last few months? India also seemed to be hedging on something else. Maybe these are the 5 questions as the framework that they have given us. I will request the panel to address. Professor Chintamani will go first. 15 minutes, sir. 12 plus 3.
It's okay. No. Thank you very much for inviting me to share some of my thoughts on such an important topic, which is dear to my heart for a long time. Now, I'll be talking about the American policy towards Asia Pacific, and all the questions that the chairperson raised will be handled here. Initially, I thought that I would speak only on the rebalancing strategy, but the questions that we have raised are almost similar. Before I begin, you can stop me. The moment is 15 minutes, no problem. Before I talk about the American policy, I must share that I was struck by the presentation by Mr. Mohan Guruswamy. For a long time, we have been feeling very good about our past, land of Gandhi, Buddha, and all those. But now we have to feel very good that after 2060, things are going to change, and we'll be really feeling good. However, when we make an economic astrology or economic trend analysis, always economic discussion are based on every other thing remaining the same. When you talk about population or any other law, then that projection would be correct. But even without questioning that, when he talked about the future, one thing was very clear, that the United States is going to be around in top 3. So that is why it is very relevant to talk about the Asian security situation and particularly the US policy. Now, the American policy of Asia pivot, how it all began. When Hillary Clinton became the American Secretary of State, first time she visited Asia and not Europe. She went to, I think, Japan, China, Indonesia, South Korea. During that time, she did that because George Bush had spent a lot of blood and money in West Asia and Southwest Asia, and the Asia-Pacific allies had felt marginalized, and they spoke about it. She articulated both in writing as well as in speeches about the Pacific century where the US would play a central role. The first official hint about a shift of focus of the American policy towards the Asia-Pacific was made by the White House. Barack Obama, speaking to the Australian parliamentarians, for the first time he talked about pivot to Asia. And then as the White House prepared a timeline for having an exit strategy from Afghanistan, the Pentagon joined the Asia pivot policy planning, and it expressed a plan to deploy 60% of its naval power in Asia. A new marine reinforcement in Darwin, Australia, where 2,500 Marines will be deployed on a rotational basis. When China blasted the Asia pivot plan as a new containment strategy, the American Commerce Department and the Treasury Department joined, again, the policy planning. And now they focused on the TPP, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was not an American initiative. It was already on, and the Americans joined it. Now the term pivot, after that, was replaced with rebalancing. And China was told that the US very much wanted to have a robust engagement with China while strengthening ties with the traditional allies and the new strategic partners such as India, and further strengthen its military presence in the region. The American officials, Obama administration officials, soon began to highlight the political, strategic, and economic importance of Asia-Pacific in glowing terms, and spoke about the rebalancing strategy that was inclusive of strategic, economic, and the political and environmental dimensions. The 3 important legs of this whole tripod is now supposed to be political, economic, and military. This is the background. This is how the American policy of pivot to Asia that we are debating today, being debated around the world, started and evolved. However, when I look at, since I'm going to talk about the American perspective, different Americans had different notions about it. So many think tanks in the USA, the media went on debating this particular issue in the congressional hearings, the officials went and testified and all that. Now, let me give you some examples of how different people interpreted Asia pivot or rebalancing strategy in different ways. One argument was, basically the American policy is now moving from hegemonic domination to regional power balancing. In the light of relative American decline, the rise of the West, and the economic downturn at home, and unwinnable wars that the Americans are involved in West Asia and Southwest Asia. That is why the whole idea is basically to do rebalancing in the light of these changes. There are other people who said, no, the pivot to Asia was originally a response to the rise of China and its growing influence in East Asia. So the economic weight and the growing strategic capability of China provoked the Americans to do something about the Asia Pacific. Then there was another argument. Actually, the Bush administration, during the Bush administration, there was a palpable feeling that the USA had abandoned Asia Pacific to the whims of emerging powers such as China. It was time then to rebalance the strategic landscape by reinserting Washington at the center of the Asia-Pacific affairs. Then there was another interpretation. The US never left Asia, but it failed to catch up with the dramatic shift in the balance of power. For the Obama administration, the Eurasian theater increasingly represented more of a distraction than a core interest. And again, in this strategic backdrop, the so-called pivot to Asia policy was conceptualized. Then the American officials began to argue, these policies are not actually an effort to contain China, which many people think. Rather, our policy is to deter China from seeking to bully some of its neighbors and dominate the region. Then they insist they want the US and Chinese Navy actually to operate in the proximity in the Western Pacific without coming to blows. So this has been, different people saw different things in the Asia pivot strategy, because this is not a cut and dried strategy announced and being implemented. Now, when I talk about the implementation, whether the strategy is only talking shop, only for seminars and conferences, or they are being implemented. Here again, there are different views, whether Asia pivot strategy or rebalancing strategy are being implemented or not being implemented. To draw your attention to some points. It was not difficult for the American strategic community to understand that China has been central to the whole idea of rebalancing strategy. Whatever was the interpretation, everybody somehow brought in China factor. China's military and economic expansion actually coincided with huge American defense expenditure in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a lot of investment of American political and time in that part of the world. American allies, including Japan, in Asia, had begun to do more trade with China than with the United States. And consequently, the American influence in all these traditional allies began to relatively decline. China's ambition, again, had gone to the extent of developing anti-access and area denial capabilities. That was perceived as a big challenge by some American policymakers, and it was a challenge to American primacy in the Western Pacific. As the Pentagon began to invest in a new ARC battle concept and developing new kind of missiles which can hit any target stealthily within China, China began to have its own anti-access and area denial capability and the assault weapon capabilities. Now, how they are being implemented. The Philippines and the United States are expected to sign a new defense pact now. My thesis was on American military relationship with Philippines, early days, and in 1992, the Americans closed down two largest overseas American military bases from the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base and Subic Naval Base, in 1992, after the end of the Cold War. And now, the Philippines and the US are expected to sign a new defense pact to be cemented by Obama's planned visit next month to Manila. Even the United States had invested a lot of things now in Vietnam, and recently they have signed a 1-2-3 agreement, civil nuclear cooperation agreement with Vietnam. About 1 million Vietnamese are there in America. The way the Americans have been using, the Indian Americans in America, now using that 1 million Vietnamese in America as a social bridge between the United States and Vietnam. The whole big new initiative towards Myanmar by Obama is another indication of how the rebalancing strategy is being worked out. In terms of military and other developments, some big aerospace contracts are now unfolding. Japan has placed an order for about 42 F-35 stealth fighters, and South Korea is expected to do the same of about 40 jets and all that. Recently, the US upped the ante by vigorously criticizing China's quasi-legal and paramilitary maneuvers in South China Sea. For some time, they kept quiet, took a non-aligned approach, rather, I would say, and did not take sides on the disputes, but now that particular position is changing. The US also has made the unprecedented decision to directly question China's claim in South China Sea, which they were not doing, just simply saying that all these claimants to different islands to talk, negotiate, dialogue, and find out ways and means of resolving the problem. But now they are taking direct interest in this. Support to Japan on Senkaku Island dispute is another example how they are implementing the Asia rebalance strategy. Very interestingly, the U.S., the chief of the American naval operations, Admiral Jonathan Greenert, recently raised hopes of direct American assistance to the Philippines. The question that he raised, direct American assistance to the Philippines in the event of a conflict with South China Sea. Let me tell you this much now from history, that during the Cold War time when the Americans established so many alliance relationships around the world, one fundamental understanding of those kind of mutual defense treaties was this. This will be applicable only in the case of communist attack on some country. They had a mutual defense treaty with Philippines. If the Philippines and the Malaysia would fight a war over Sabah differences, then this treaty would not be invoked. But now the containment strategy is not there, but they're saying, at least the American Navy officer is saying that they would come to the help of Philippines. The American Marines training in Japan's newly formed amphibious force recently in how to invade.
3 more minutes.
3 more minutes, okay. In how to invade and retake an island captured by hostile force. Recently there was an exercise between Japan and the United States. How to capture an island, and then if it is under the enemy attack, how to retrieve it. There was a big article in New York Times. You can see China's name is figuring very clearly in that. Now, there are many American critics now who are raising different kind of questions about the Asia pivot. Although the kind of examples I gave looks very clear that the Americans are really pivoting towards Asia. See, how the Americans are looking at it. Despite claiming to have made a pivot to the Pacific, Washington has declined to stand up to China in support of Japan. Because when there was a dispute over Senkaku Island, I think the Defense Secretary first went to China and said that we are not going to take a position on the sovereignty issue. Then the same guy goes to Tokyo and say, in case there is a conflict with China, our old treaty alliance will come into force. Ambiguous statement. Now, this is being questioned by many American analysts. For all the talk about rebalancing American forces and establishing a greater presence in the region, many feel that the U.S. has been preoccupied with other pressing issues. In fact, they're thinking that the whole idea of pivot was Hillary Clinton's and Obama's, and that time Leon Panetta. The moment the second term begins, the different people are now in action, and the new Defense Secretary and the new Secretary of State, they are not giving too much importance to Asia Pacific. Kerry is too much busy in resolving the problem between the Palestinians and the Israelis and the Syrian question, Iranian question, now Crimea, and he has no time for Asia Pacific. So they think that the US policy is going nowhere. The pivot to Asia strategy is in deep rock. It is not going to happen in the future. And then the other people are saying that on the one hand, you are reducing your defense expenditure. On the other hand, you are talking about pivot to Asia. Although you are making repeatedly the statement that this defense expenditure reduction is not actually going to impact upon the pivot to Asia, this is being questioned. Now, because of lack of time, I'll just give you 2 instances how the Americans are challenging this new concept of Asia pivot and saying it is not going to work out. The American Navy's recent 2014 shipbuilding plan is this. Over the next 5 years, I'm not talking about next 45 years, over the next 5 years, the Navy still plans to retire more ships than it will build. In fact, 31 ships are set to retire in fiscal years 2014 and 2015 alone. This means that in the very near term, the Navy will drop to 270 ships, its lowest level since World War I. Then the new marine presence that the Americans are talking about in Australia, it is not a big change. What is this 2,500 Marines in Australia? They are saying that last spring, the American and the Japanese governments agreed on the removal of about 9,000 Marines from Okinawa, and then they resettled them among different islands. And some of them will go to Australia. So what is new there? Likewise, the Pentagon announced that 60% of the ships are going to be deployed in Pacific. What is the big deal? They're saying that according to the most recent data available from the US Navy, 50% of the existing aircraft carriers are currently home ported or deployed in the Pacific already. 53% of destroyers, 55% of cruisers, 57% of ballistic missile submarines, and 56% of attack submarines. Now, if it is going to be 60% from 57 to 60, 53 to 60, what is the big deal? So they are saying that the Obama's initial aim of rebalancing the strategy in Asia Pacific is going nowhere. The situation in Syria, Crimea, the Arab Spring is going to keep the American attention more and more, and this is going to go nowhere. I have 3 million things to say, but I think we can do during Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.